People don't leave companies. They leave cultures where they don't feel valued. Welcome to the Appreciation at Work podcast, where we share real stories from leaders building workplaces that teams don't want to leave. I'm your host, Dr. William Attaway. I want you to think of one person on your team that you'd hand a hard problem to without checking their work afterward. Someone where if they told you it was handled, you'd actually believe it was handled. Got somebody? Good. Now think of someone else. Someone whose work you find yourself quietly double checking, even when you can't fully explain why. Maybe you tell yourself it's just thoroughness. Maybe it is. But be honest with yourself for a second. That gap between those two people isn't usually about skill. Both of them might be equally capable on paper. That gap is about trust. And today we're talking about what actually builds it, what quietly destroys it, usually without you noticing until it's already gone, and what you can do about it starting this week. Welcome back to the Appreciation at Work podcast. I'm Dr. William Attaway, CEO of Appreciation at Work. Most of what we talk about on this show lives inside the 5 languages of appreciation, the specific ways that people feel valued at work. But today, I want to zoom out one level, because here's something I've come to believe deeply after working with people for decades. Appreciation doesn't mean much if it's not standing on a foundation of trust. You can say all the right words to someone. You can use their exact appreciation language. But if they don't trust you as a leader, those words bounce right off. They sound nice. They just don't land. Someone once described trust as being like oxygen. You don't notice it when it's there, but the moment it's gone, nothing else matters. I think that's exactly right. And I think most leaders underestimate just how much of their team's daily behavior is being quietly shaped by how much trust exists in the room. So today, I want us to talk about what trust is actually built on, what kills it, and what you can start doing this week to build more of it, whether you're starting from scratch or trying to rebuild something that's been damaged. Here's the bottom line up front. Trust is the foundation of every high-performing team. Not communication skills, not perks, not even competence on its own. Trust. Harvard Business Review has found that teams with higher trust perform roughly 50% better than teams without it. Sit with that number for a second. That is not a marginal edge you'd need a spreadsheet to notice. That's the difference between a team that's merely functional and one that's dangerous to the competition in the best possible sense. Here's something you've probably heard before, and it's worth repeating because it's true. People don't leave companies. They leave leaders. I'd amend that slightly and say that they leave cultures where they didn't feel valued or trusted. If you think back to a job you left, and I mean really think about it, not just the socially acceptable answer you'd give in an exit interview, odds are it wasn't the business itself that pushed you out the door. It was a person or an environment that that person created and either couldn't or wouldn't fix. Here's why this matters practically, not just philosophically. When people trust their leader, they take calculated risks. They bring you the idea that might not work. They flag the problem while it's still small, before it becomes the kind of crisis that shows up in a board meeting. When trust is absent, people play it safe. They stop bringing you anything worth bringing. They quietly slide into self-protection mode. Heads down, don't rock the boat, and you lose access to their best thinking at exactly the moment you need it most. There are three things people are unconsciously evaluating every single time they decide whether to trust you, and that you're evaluating in them, whether you've ever put words to it or not. First, competence. Can I trust that you can actually do what you say you can do? This is usually the first thing we screen for in a hiring process, and understandably so. But it's worth remembering that competence is only one third of this equation. A brilliant, highly competent person with no consistency or character will still erode trust over time. Second, consistency. Can I trust that you'll follow through on what you said you'd do? Will you do what you said you'd do when you said you would do it? Can I count on you to show up the same way today as you did last week and the week before that? Consistency is what turns a single good interaction into an actual pattern that someone can build their expectations around. One great month doesn't build trust nearly as much as 12 unremarkable, dependable months in a row. Third, character. Can I trust that you have integrity and that you'll do the right thing even when it costs you something? This is the pillar that matters most in the moments no one's watching, because character, by definition, is what you do when there's no audience and no immediate consequence for cutting the corner. Here's the important part, and I want you to really hear this. When just one of these three pillars is weak, trust starts to erode slowly, sometimes almost invisibly. When more than one is weak at the same time, trust doesn't erode gradually anymore. It collapses, often faster than you'd expect. So now let's talk about what actually destroys trust. Because in my experience, most leaders aren't doing this on purpose. It happens by accident in the small stuff, often while they're trying their best. Trust killer number one is a lack of clarity. I say this quote often from Dr. Brene Brown in nearly every context I coach in, because I believe it all the way down. Clarity is kindness. When your expectations, your goals, or your communication are vague, people do not fill that vagueness with grace. They fill it with uncertainty. And uncertainty is something the human brain simply does not trust. If your team doesn't know what a win actually looks like, they will guess. And their guess may look nothing like what you had in mind. Through no fault of their own, they make an assumption. And as we all know, assumptions are dangerous. Trust killer number two is micromanagement and a lack of ownership. If you're constantly checking someone's work, constantly looking over their shoulder, here's the uncomfortable truth that I want to hand you. That is rarely a them problem. It's usually a you problem wearing a them costume. If you don't trust your people, they will not trust you back. Trust is not a one-way transaction. The fix isn't ignoring real problems when they show up. It's moving from control into coaching, setting clear expectations up front, and then letting people own not just the task itself, but some real decision making about how it actually gets done. Give them not just responsibility, but authority. Trust killer number three, broken commitments. This is, in my experience, the fastest way to torch trust that exists. A leader says one thing and does another. Says they'll follow up by Friday, and Friday comes and goes. Says, that'll never happen here, and then it happens anyway. When this occurs, and at some point it will, because you're human, and humans break commitments sometimes. The fix is simple to describe, but really hard to execute. Own it. Own it immediately, out loud. Don't wait for someone to catch you in it. Name it yourself before they have to, and then follow through better next time. Even the small commitments matter here because your team is always watching. Let me paint a picture of what a genuine trust rebuild actually looks like in practice, because it's almost never as dramatic as people expect. Picture a department director, sharp, well liked personally by nearly everyone, someone who, by any surface level measure, was doing fine. But her team had quietly stopped bringing her problems. Her meetings were smooth, too smooth in hindsight. No real pushback, no half formed new ideas floated out loud, nobody flagging risk before it became unavoidable. On paper, everything looked calm and under control. But underneath that calm, her team had learned. Not through anything she said, but through what happened when problems did surface. Flagging an issue early got you blamed for it. So, the safer move, the one that protected you personally, was to stay quiet and hope the problem resolved itself before anyone upstream noticed. She didn't figure this out through an engagement survey or through an exit interview. She figured it out the day a small, fixable problem blew up into an expensive, visible one, because someone on her team had actually seen it coming 3 full weeks earlier and had chosen to say nothing. Here's what she did next, and this is the part I really want you to pay attention to. She didn't send around an email asking people to please speak up more. That almost never works because it puts the burden back on the people who already didn't feel safe. Instead, she got in front of her team in person and named the dynamic directly. I think I've made it unsafe for you to bring me bad news early, and that's on me, not on any of you. Then she did something harder than the apology itself. For the next full month, every single time someone brought her an early problem, even a small, mildly annoying one, she thanked them for it out loud in front of the group, even when the problem itself was frustrating to hear. Within about 2 months, her team was flagging issues weeks earlier than they had been before. Nothing about her formal authority changed. Nothing about the org chart changed. What changed was her team's read on the environment. And that shift, not a new process, not a new tool, not a new dashboard, that shift is what actually let trust rebuild. You don't need a culture initiative or a consultant to move this needle. You can start here, today. First, be predictable in the right way. Unpredictability creates anxiety in a team, even when you don't mean for it to. When you say you're going to do something, do it on the timeline you said. A stable, consistent tone from you as the leader is one of the simplest trust deposits available to you. And it costs you nothing except the discipline of follow through. Second, give trust before you've technically earned the right to withhold it. Instead of making people prove themselves before you extend any trust at all, start from trust as your default position and hold people accountable from there. That doesn't mean abandoning oversight or ignoring red flags. It means leading with, I trust you, and I'm going to check in because that's good practice, instead of leading with, prove it to me first, and maybe someday you'll have earned my trust. Third, create real space for the last 10% of honesty. The first 90% of honest feedback is pretty easy for most people to share with you. But it's that last 10%, the part we hold back, the thing that might sting a little, might create some friction, might feel risky to say out loud to your face. That is where the most valuable information actually lives. If you want that 10% from your team, you have to visibly welcome it, especially the first few times someone tests the waters to see whether it's actually safe to bring it to you. Here's the thread I want you to leave with today. Trust and appreciation aren't two separate initiatives running on parallel tracks. They're deeply connected, almost inseparable in practice. It's very hard to feel appreciated by someone you don't fundamentally trust. And it's very hard to trust someone who's never shown you they see you as an actual 3D human being and not just a function on an org chart. So this week, pick one thing, one pillar you need to shore up, one trust killer you need to stop doing starting today. One strategy from that last section you're actually going to try, not just nod along with. Information without execution doesn't change anything about your team or your culture. Execution is where the real transformation happens. And that part is entirely up to you. If you want more tools like this, practical, research grounded, built specifically for people who are actually leading teams day to day, not just reading about leadership, that's exactly what the Appreciation at Work AR Professional Membership is for. You can check it out at hr.joinaaw.com. Thanks for spending this time with me today. Go build a little more trust with someone on your team. And I'll see you next episode.